Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome, everybody, depending, of course, on what time of day you're listening or watching. Welcome to episode number 41 of Run It Back. I'm Menelik Fernandez. I'm the host of Run It Back. And I start every episode the same. So, as always, I will say that I will start this the same. Basically, the premise of Run It Back is we take teams that have played previously and we run the game back, so to speak. We talk about what's worked from a preparation point of view. Excuse me. We talk about what worked with the game plan, what didn't work with the game plan, actions we liked, adjustments we made, all the fun stuff that goes into a game. And This particular week, we are going to take a look at a U18 Euro Championship game that took place July 28th, 2019, which is Ukraine versus Ireland. And As usual, we are very fortunate to have one of the coaches from one of the two teams join us and lend their perspective of what happened in the game. So we have Paul Kelleher from Ireland's national team joining us today. Paul, if you give me a second, I'm going to try and do you justice with a nice little intro here. Paul is in his 12th year with Basketball Ireland. He's been a head coach, an assistant coach. He's currently the winningest coach at the underage level. So I would assume that means not the men's team, but all of the divisions that are underneath that. He's been a head senior coach at the Neptune Basketball Club for 5 years. He was a head coach for 2 years with the UL Eagles. A 15 months as a head coach with the Glanmire Basketball Club. And he was a head coach with the UCC Demons, which is a Super League team. So, Paul, I am incredibly thankful and feeling very fortunate to have you join us today. Hopefully, I didn't mess up those names too badly for you, but welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
It's a real pleasure. So, normally we like to start with preparation, but if you don't mind, just because I'm over here in Canada and I'm not familiar with the landscape, give me an idea of sort of like the national team format at this age level, like how long have the kids been with the program, how are they identified, do you stay with them as they move up, what is the format of this game, what everything that's taking place in and around it. Give me a background, please.
I guess with the national teams, it's every country is different. Um, for us, we're probably unique in how we do it. In that we practice pretty much free reign in the summer, and then when school kicks in and club events kick in, we're probably once every 4 or 5 weeks, depending on what the calendar allows within the federation. Some federations they will just go block. When the season finishes, they'll get together. They'll have multiple training camps, and a lot of that has down to maybe the standard of the country, the finances. We're very much self-funded, so all the kids fund themselves. So it's for us getting together once every 4 or 5 weeks is a huge thing for us. Obviously, we wouldn't be the highest ranked federation in the world, so we have a lot to kind of do, and it works. Like we've started to implement um, pathways in terms of our under 14, under 15. We've changed the format the last couple of years, where now it used to be a 2 year program. It's now a 1 year program. In terms of, we now have an official under 17 program, um, where the players go with one particular coach for that year, and then come to the under 18 program for the second year. And similarly with the under 14 academy now is eight regions. Then our under 15 it becomes 4 provinces, and then the 1 year practice time with the 16 national team. They will then come back into the under 17 program, work with the coach there, and then come to me at under 18 level. So I'm currently in, take last year's cancellation of the Europeans. I'm currently in the third year of this tenure, which is a 3 year tenure. So hopefully we'll get to go ahead this year, and this will be the final year before I have to re-interview again.
Right. So give me a little bit of background of this game. So, I mean, is this a qualifying game that would be utilized to help you get into the finals for the Euro Championship, which then, of course, would lead to the Olympics type deal? Or
So at the youth level in FIBA, there's three divisions. There's the A division where there's 16 teams. In the B division, there's 24 teams, and then the remainder of the teams, depending on whether they enter or not, are in the C division.
right,
This particular year, 2019, was the first year we had come back into the B division from the C division. So it was not we were a sixth seed within the group. This is the third game of the pool. So in the B division, there are four pools of six.
right,
The format in FIBA, it's the top two go to the top eight of the competition. The next two in the pool go to 9 to 16, and
right,
the bottom two teams go 17 to 24. And then you just place yourself after that then. But so for us, we were the sixth seed, having been promoted from the C division. So we were pretty much predicted to finish last in the pool. We ended up actually finishing fourth in the pool, which meant that we were in the 9 to 16 bracket. But all our games were quite close. This particular game with Ukraine, we were both at one win and one loss. So it was a massive game to stay in the hunt to make the top eight, which is something that we'd never done at the under 18 level before. So we had come off beating Slovak Republic, and we had actually ourselves and Ukraine had already lost to Macedonia. So we were kind of really jostling for position in the group right there.
not too many people know I'm half Macedonian, so I
Oh,
won't
very
point out,
nice.
I won't point out that I'll have a subtle cheer, but not too big of one. So let's go into the specifics of this particular game. Let's talk preparation. So, you mentioned you played some other games. Like, how do you approach the tournament? Do you have a breakdown of all the teams? Do you have video of all the teams? What are you preparing for your guys, and how are you delivering that to your guys?
I guess with the way, obviously with the senior event, the teams can change game on game. Your 12 can pretty much be changed. When we go to an event like this, you're kind of trying to get the balance right of the amount of forwards, of the amount of guards you potentially need, wings, all that sort of stuff. So it's not necessarily about bringing maybe your best 12 players. It's about having the balance right for 8 games, because this event is an 8-game event,
Right.
regardless of where you finish. So usually that last maybe three or four spots might be more tactical based rather than ability based at times. Whereas when you go to the senior games, you're moving between games. You can pretty much bring who you need to bring depending on your opponent. You're
Right.
trying to match it with the underage stuff. So the draw usually comes out between Christmas and New Year's, so you kind of start planning. But very few teams leave their stuff out there, so it's quite hard to get some game for them. It's not on YouTube. It's not. So it's kind of like going through all the back channels to try and get something if at all possible. So we play a game of a team against a team that maybe Ukraine have played against, and we're trying to change games. Or
Right.
so really it is like, you must help us in order for us to help you type of thing. So if you don't get fortunate enough to be able to exchange, you're going in blind on some of the preparation. With Ukraine, they had played an under 17 event against a club team from Ireland the year before, so we had a little bit of knowledge of some of the players, not massively. So it was quite difficult. So you really don't get to know them really until you get there and you see them play a couple of games, and then you start kind of practicing towards that then.
So when you get there and you see a couple games, are those games recorded that you can get your hands on?
Yeah. Yeah, and they go on YouTube. Then obviously, they're showing live on YouTube with FIBA. So it's and every night there's a queue waiting for the raw footage,
Right.
all the hosts and stuff like that, so we can break it down and get ready for the next game and stuff like that. So it's an intense event. It's one of the things that I look forward to every year. It's a 12-day event. You get a couple of rest days, but it's intense. You're pretty much going 18 to 20 hours a day. Getting your scout ready for the following day and then getting practice prep.
So you got 8 games, 12 days. Do you remember how much time was between the game prior to this and this one? And do you remember sort of what you delivered to your guys during that time period?
It was you can get quite fortunate. There's generally 4 game periods throughout the day, and generally FIBA do a good job of trying to balance it where maybe if you play on a nighttime schedule, you're going to try and get maybe a nighttime again the following day, or if you're fortunate enough, you may end up getting one of the first games at like 1:30, 2 o'clock, and you're playing again at 8 p.m. the following day. So you have that little bit of extra time. But there's always going to be where you have a short prep window. You might end up having where you play the last game the night before, and you might play in the second or the third window the following day. And they can be quite hard to prepare for in terms of recovery, getting the scout ready. Do you practice the following day? Do you have a run through, or is it a balance of, is it late in the tournament where a rest and a lie-in may actually be better for the players? So you're constantly kind
Right.
of monitoring, the players to get a sense of how they're feeling. And the game after this,
Right.
we played Denmark after this Ukraine game, and we didn't practice the following morning because we had already played Denmark in the Dustman Trophy final a few weeks earlier, and we'd beaten them, but we knew that we were going to have a similar game plan, maybe 1 or 2 adjustments. But because this Ukraine game was late, we felt that giving them the line the following morning for the Denmark game was more beneficial, and we actually beat them by double figures than what we had beaten them in the Dustman Trophy. So it kind of worked out well that way. But sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
For sure. So with Ukraine, what did you deliver to your guys? Let's go into the specifics a little bit of what the game plan was and how you were approaching the matchups and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so they had 3 key players: number 31, number 7, number 10. Pronouncing their names is just next to impossible. But their 2 guards, number 7 and 10, ended up hurting us, and we didn't really. We followed the game plan in terms of the half court against them, but they were so quick, and we didn't have as quick a guards that they hurt us in the open floor off a missed shot. So the 3 key areas for us going into that game were finish the easy things at the rim, take care of the basketball, win the glass, and if we can get back in transition, they were the 3-4 key areas. Looking back at the stats, we actually won none of those areas. We ended up losing the game by 11, and one of the key areas was throughout the game I felt was our finishing at the rim wasn't very clinical, which allowed their 2 speedster guards to get out and run on us and finish in the open floor more than what we wanted to have happen. And when I look back at the game, their first 18 points of the game were actually all runouts. They didn't play us in the half court. When we did get them in the half court,
Right.
we actually contained them quite well, especially in the ball screen that they were quite good at, and kept them from moving the ball as good as what they could have been. Traditionally, we would never compete with Ukraine, but in this particular game, we felt we had the ability to finish at the rim quite well, which would have allowed us to set our defense to stop them hurting us in penetration. And for the first 18 points, we did that in the half court, but for more misses, they punished us massively.
Right. Um, so you mentioned that there were the 3 players that you identified as probably being the guys that were keys to the game. What would you like? Would you look for particular tendencies of them, and would you give those tendencies to all of your players, or just the players that you would end up having guard them type deal?
So like we would have a 1-page scout report, and we
Okay.
would break it down into our offense, their offense, our defense, their defense. Underneath that key box, we would have the 3 keys of the game to re-emphasize the 3 priorities that we'd have in the game. On the right side, we would have the 4 or 5, sometimes 6 players that we need to be aware of, 3 major tendencies of those players. And on the left side, we would have the man-to-man schemes that we're going to focus on in that particular game, or the actions we're going to focus on, and what specifically within that, and who we're specifically trying to get the ball to if we're going to a scheme. In this particular game, though, we felt that we were better than them going from defense to offense. So with our passing ability and how early we want to play our offense, we felt that was a major weakness of them. However, while we got beyond them in the initial phases of the game, I felt we didn't move the ball after we got that first pass. And
Right.
we tended to rush our shots. And I think we over focused on hurting them early in the shot clock rather than we want to put pressure on them early in the shot clock. And that kind of hurt our decision making early. And we missed a bunch of easy semi-contested layups. We would track layups a lot, percentage of layups, percentage of contested layups, percentage of uncontested layups, because one of our main phrases is missed layups aren't just missed layups. And if you look throughout any particular game, inevitably, when you miss a layup, you either foul, you give up a layup on the other end, or you give up both together. So missed layups in that particular game, I felt was a massive contributor to our downfall. If we contained that, if we'd finished better, an 11-point game isn't a massive distance to close if you're a better finisher at the rim.
I like it. So in that, I mean, obviously you've given us a little bit of what you track in game. You've given us like what goes on the one-page scout there, which I appreciate. When you are playing, like having watched this game, there's definitely some things that you mentioned that I think didn't happen as well as they should have in the game. So how do you make those adjustments in game, and at what points are you making those adjustments? Do you do a lot of stuff on the fly? Are you doing it in timeouts? In this game, I believe at the end of the first quarter, you guys had actually only scored 9 points, and then you had a really good second quarter. So like, as a for instance, what are you saying at the break there, and how do you factor in what you're statting?
So like one of the things in our scout that we have is we have definite things that they will do, and we have what we need to be aware of that may happen throughout the game. It's not a tendency of them, but there's one or two things that have happened in the previous two games that we've noticed that may happen. It's not necessarily a tendency, but it's happened sporadically, maybe once or twice throughout the game that we just might need to be aware of. So one of the things that we needed to be aware of in this game was their 31, which was their main guy, and we actually played against him in 3-on-3 the year before out in Bari in Italy. He was a very face-up guy. He wasn't a back-to-the-basket guy. But the odd time when he kind of gets you comfortable with you facing up, he'll just pin you every now and again, and that was one of the areas that we felt could hurt us if we didn't defend the post and wasn't aware that he did that. But in terms of only scoring 9 points in our first quarter, we actually had some really good uncontested looks. One of the things that happened in that game was they had 12 steals, we had 6. The difference in the style of steals was a massive contributor. We turned the ball over on their steals, going from wing to point passes.
Right.
Gave them runouts.
Gave them runouts.
Our steals were deep on the block, which meant that they already had defensive position, so we weren't able to punish them as much as they were able to punish us. And that really, really hurt us. Of the 12 steals they had, I think they had 18 points off of that out of 24. And that hurt us massively. And actually, 2 of those were threes. So if you look at, I think it was 61-57, and Rapolas Boavidas missed a layup and they hit a 3 coming down the left side, switched it to the opposite side and nailed the 3 to go back up 7 with about maybe, I think it was at 5:50 or
I think it was just over 6 minutes is where you're talking about, because I think we had, I think when we were speaking, I mentioned that it was 4 points at the 5-minute mark. I think it was actually 4 points at the 7-minute mark. And I think the score is exactly what you were talking about, 61-57 there.
And that particular layup was probably frustrating considering that we do a ton of work on terms of pro stops and getting into the contact rather than coming away from the contact. And that particular layup, Rap was coming off of a left side road runner and went off his left foot for a fadeaway rather than getting across the defender's body to finish with his left hand, which he actually did in the next possession.
Right.
So it was one of those things where, but that particular thing in the first quarter was what was happening. So I don't think we actually played particularly poorly in terms of our shot selection in the first quarter. We just didn't make shots, particularly semi-contested layups, which we did do in the second quarter, and even better again post 3 minutes of the third, because I think we went down 16 early in the third quarter and we got back to 6 points on the buzzer at the end of the third. So we had that 10-point winning margin from minute 3 to the end of the third quarter. So we didn't really change a whole lot. We just said we just need to finish better. We just need to be more confident in our shooting ability. So we didn't really change a whole lot, other than the fact that maybe we needed to move the ball to get more uncontested shots. And I think that's what happened in the second quarter.
Let's talk. You know what? Let's go back a second before I get to screen coverages. I want to come back to screen coverages and how you developed what you were going to do for this game. But going back to the evaluation, I'm actually pretty interested in this a lot of the time. You have a lot of games in a short period of time. You don't have a lot of film. And obviously, like, you're going to get their film at the end of the night and you're trying to take in whatever games you can see during it. What are the first things you look at when you're evaluating an opponent that you're about to play? And then after the first things, what are the more important things? Like you mentioned on your report, you guys came up with a few things that it was like, these are things that are going to be non-negotiables for them they're going to do. But then you also mentioned there's probably 2 or 3 things we have to sort of look out for. How do you build that when you're just sort of evaluating on the fly?
So I think if it's game one, it's very difficult because you're kind of more focusing on yourself. So like that Macedonia game, we were very much focusing on ourselves. We didn't know a whole lot what we were going to face into. We were aware of 1 or 2 of their players. I was actually good friends with their assistant. They were trying to find stuff on us. We were trying to find stuff on them. So in that particular case, it's quite difficult. When you get to game 2, you're particularly only getting 1 game essentially. And then when you get to game 3, which is what this Ukraine was, we're trying to find out what are they doing defensively mainly. And we were very much aware that because of our style, that they were probably going to go zone against us, which meant that they would be back to throw probably quicker than we expected. Right. They went one early, and we actually did okay in it. We got a nice high-low early in the second possession. We tried to take advantage of that, but we gave too many rainbow passes against the zone, which meant that it allowed them to recover on our catches. And even when the ball was in the air, we needed to be more laser-like with our passes when we shifted them to take advantage of the ball getting into the middle of the zone, which we did quite easily, but we just made poor decisions from there.
Right.
But in terms of like what we're looking for, how are they playing off their ball screen? How are they defending ball screens? Where do they tend to shoot the ball from? Which actually hurt us because we recognized that they were very much between the 2 slots, shooting a lot of their shots. And late in this game, we pushed them to the corners when we got it back to 4. I think it was a 61-57. We got it back to 4. We pushed them to the corners because we had not seen them shoot well from the corners in the first couple of games. And they made 3 shots in the bounce from the corners to blow the game over.
I think one of them, if I'm not mistaken, I think you went to a 1-3-1 for like one like I got a clip. Let's wait and talk about it during the clip. But like that one, I think is basically right where you're talking about in that element of they got 2 or 3 from the corners. And
that was actually a frustrating one. We could talk about it later, as you said, but that was frustrating because we actually practiced all preparation games with CJ, who was on top of that 1-3-1 on the ball side wing. So we tried to force his ball side because he was a shorter guard, and we always had our length on top. And the frustrating thing about that 1-3-1 was we actually moved CJ and they skipped the ball over him to the corner. Whereas if we had our length, that may not have been there. So that was just a coaching error more than anything else. But I think, what's their tempo? Actually in that particular game, we had 4 more possessions than Ukraine. I think we averaged 84.7, and I think they had 81.3 or something like that possessions in that game. So we knew we were going to have more possessions. What we wanted to try and evaluate was, if we speed the game up and we press, how can they hurt us? If we slow the game down by not pressing and getting into the half court and containing the middle, what were there? And they didn't show any signs of hurting any teams when the defense was compact. When the defense spaced out, that's when they're hurt, especially off of ball screens. So we wanted to help in off of the wings on ball screens, which I think we did relatively well early. They actually traveled on their first possession because of that. But I think, what we didn't do well in the first quarter, we did really well in the third quarter, which was the original game plan. And then we had to adjust on the fly in the second quarter to things I didn't expect us to do. So late in the first, we actually went to a more deliberate scheme, which was our scissor scheme. and we actually started getting control of the game a little bit when we went to our scissor scheme, which we did continued into the second quarter, and we actually didn't run it for the rest of the game, which was, when I look back, and it was a poor decision, but we hurt them in other schemes. But that third quarter was exactly, from minute 3 on, was exactly what the game plan or game idea was the way it was supposed to happen, and we ended up winning that period by 10 points. So yeah, so like, I mean, we want to know more how we can hurt them more than they can hurt us,
For
because
sure.
we've
Makes
never
sense.
been a team that's been recognized as a top team in the B division, but we've always been able to compete, and we've been able to compete because we run harder, we try and be aggressive defensively. And actually, a major turning point in that game down the stretch was when they hit the first 3 in the corner. David Hand, number 10, was actually picked up his 4th, and we brought Tiernan in, and David actually defended really well throughout the game. And we just switched Tiernan to somebody else, and we just fell asleep, and they hit the 3. So being aggressive in that game kind of hurt us down the stretch, because we had a couple of our key defenders on foul trouble, and it hurt us with rotations down the stretch.
Brings up the question of rotations and how you manage that, but let me get to that in a second. I got one thing that you had just brought up, and then I want to get to the screen coverages and how you decided on them, as I had mentioned. You were able to cite possessions just now. What's the formula you use? Because I know there's a couple ways to arrive at the possession formula, and like the one that I seem to think is most common over here is the field goals attempted minus the offensive rebounds plus the turnovers plus 40% of the free throws attempted. Is that similar to what you're doing, or are you doing the much bigger, more complex one that you find on the NBA page?
Perfectly honest, it's actually one of our federation guys actually does that for us. So he comes up with a couple of things post game for us. So he
Nice.
was the one that kind of tracked that for us, and we get it after the game and the amount of possessions. I mean, if you look at the game, there's only me and one assistant, so we don't really have the firepower of other federations in terms of being able to track those live in game, or even had a time to between the two of us to get that information afterwards. So
Right.
that's done back at HQ essentially.
And I mean, it also comes down to, like, I ask the question often, like, what are you tracking on the bench? What's pertinent to you? Like, how pertinent is that to game time decisions? Like, hey, we have more possessions than they do. Great. Like, that's good to know. Moving on, how does that affect what I'm going to do type deal?
I mean, I truly believe that, like, when a shot goes up and you get an offensive rebound, to me, I believe that's a new possession because you've had a shot and you're recycling it. But obviously the formulas don't agree with that. But
Yeah.
if that was the case, then Ukraine would have had multiple more possessions, considering the amount of second chance opportunities that they got and executed. So yeah, I mean, for me, we like to have a lot of possessions. We're a tempo team. You see from some of the clips, we like to shoot the ball early if at all possible. We are very much a transition structured on the way down, but then we get into our flow after that with one or two automatics along the way. But I thought we competed really well with that Ukraine game, and at 61, actually the first possession of the fourth quarter, I think we had a nice little road runner off of a floppy, turned the corner, we missed a little floater to bring it back to 2, and I think that would have been a huge turning point of the game because they were really panicking. I mean, obviously they were
Sorry,
supposed
Paul,
to.
I got to interrupt you for a second. I let it go the first time, but the second time I got to ask, is a roadrunner a floater?
No, when you're catching on the go and you're
Playing at like the 0.5 second, like you're catching and you're on the go on the catch, playing through the catch.
Turn the corner off a screen or on a blast up, or you're not really thinking, you're just kind of like catching and pulling it down off
Right.
the goal.
Gotcha. Sorry about that. It's one that I don't know. So going back to the screen coverages, how did you decide what you were going to use? Were you more, we're going to do what we do well, or were there certain things that led you into what you decided for this game?
So with this group, I mean, we've never really defended ball screens the same over the time with each team over the time I've been there. Obviously, we base on our personnel. With this particular group, a couple of things, forced us into defending one particular way and hopefully doing it really, really well. So we call it the flat. Some people call it the drop or whatever it is. We call it the flat. Um, for the simple reason, one, our starting centre was coming off an 11-week injury, had only 10 days to prepare coming into the tournament. Secondly, all our forwards, we didn't really have many athletic forwards, if any at all. So we decided that our guards are pretty good at getting over screens, and we call that defending in two. So we want to make sure that we're in front within two. In this particular game, we didn't do it well at all. And the second thing is we were fairly strong in the front with our forwards, that we felt that we call it keeping the gate closed. So we don't want to open the hips up. And we did an awful job in the fourth quarter. We actually did quite a decent enough job for the first three. I think, knowing what I know now, looking back on that, the counter off of that, we would have iced. We should have iced because we were in position to do that, or we would have next defense because our guards are pretty good at switching. We were actually a really good switching team with our guards. So a next defense would have really helped us with that element of it too. So I think what hurt our confidence in terms of ball screens was we were preparing for flat defense. When we played Macedonian game one, we changed one or two things slightly, and it didn't go particularly well. I think we lost our confidence in our ball screen coverage after the Macedonia game. We got it back a little bit against Slovak, but against a good team like Ukraine and the two guards that were in position, I think we did a decent job early. But I think once they got into their flow, they hurt us down the stretch. And we did, I think what even hurt us even more was the adjustment at half time. We went to a 2-3 zone to stop them turning the corner. And I think that's when they went up 16. They went from, 6 at halftime to 16 in like 3 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So when we changed to a 2-3 and they hurt us in that, I think that really hurt our confidence in defending that point. So we tried to speed the game up to not allow them get into ball screen coverages, which I think forced us to take too many quick shots then after that.
So with the national team, would you have a lot of time to practice various types of coverages and then have the ability to implement them when you need in a tournament like this?
So we would have quite a deep squad at the beginning of the year. So like, I know Gareth is on the call here. I mean, he'll have a bunch of players and they'll come through to us. But because the level isn't as high as what we'd like it to be in Ireland, they don't get to experience the things that we're trying to achieve at the European Championships.
Right.
So when we're talking about certain things, they have never experienced because it's very much, I don't know, whether it's a freelance, whether it's, let them play, whether it's figuring it out, whatever it is. But that then in turn doesn't allow us to experience some defensive higher level details that we're going to experience at European Championships. So we've got to try and keep it a little bit compact if at all possible. But, I think our ball screen coverages with this particular team hurt us. We weren't a great ball screen defensive team. But there were other aspects that we were good at that we just couldn't get to in this particular game, which hurt us down the stretch.
Right. Unless any coaches have any questions, I think we've covered everything from preparation that I typically get through, and I'm absolutely ready to jump into a little bit of film from this one. Does anybody have anything? Awesome. Let me get set up here for a second, Paul. And we can see that all right. We're good there.
Yep.
Awesome. And let me get my video panel up. So we start at the beginning, so to speak. This is their first play of the game. And I mean, basically my note was just talk a little bit about your drop coverage and the teaching points. You had mentioned previously that you didn't want to open up so much at the hips. And for anybody who's listening, it's really just a top pick and roll going towards what is about to become the double side because they're sending a cutter through. So the roller is coming down the single side. The drop doesn't really engage, and then they have a drop off, but he travels before he makes the layup, so they get no basket out of it. So give me your thoughts on it, please, and thank you.
Yeah, one of the things that we try to do is, let me just set the share up. Few options in this.
Yeah.
Annotate.
We're gonna get some annotate going on. I love it.
So like one of the things that we wanted to do here was we wanted Sanmi to be on right here, just there on the elbow. And as you can see, like he's 3 feet off. So obviously Paul Kelly is over here, and that's something that we wanted. That's fine. But they cut the collar through, which then forces Dave Hand to stay home a little bit. That kind of hurt us a small bit. And I think Sanmi was very much aware of the fact that there was action behind there, but
right.
needed to be really on the elbow so that way then Paul is able to take the role if needs be, and we can switch out to the wing. But because Sanmi is here, or he's 3 to 4 feet inside the elbow.
So basically on the nail, yeah.
Yeah, so he's on the nail, and that alignment really hurts us. CJ gets caught in the screen. So one of the things that we wanted to have happen here is that CJ is higher, but he gets bumped down. So now he's chasing the hip. So one of the things that we try and teach is get the left foot over first to try and turn him back in. So that was one of our key things in the scout. And I think that might be the reason why Sanmi tried to be at the nail. So that if we turned him back in, Sanmi was already on the nail. So he was being a little bit presumptuous, we'll say. We won't use the word lazy, we'll use the word presumptuous.
Right. Sounds fair to me. Do you, like when you guys are practicing your screen coverages and all, do you do it against a lot of cutting? So what I mean by that is, like in this particular clip, I would argue that they're changing the double side, and by sending a guy through from the left side to the right side. Do you do a lot of playing against variations like that, or is it more so that you're working kind of in the static format of like, hey, this is the double, this is the single, let's get the coverage right first and then implement the cutting later?
Yeah, that was probably something new for us. I mean, obviously it's a major topic in the last 2 years of cutting the 45 now.
Right.
It wasn't something that we were aware of at the time, so we wouldn't have practiced against that, to be perfectly honest. And especially at youth level, you wouldn't expect to see that. But then again, I mean, all these guys that we're playing against are in pro situations, so whereas our guys probably wouldn't be,
Right.
And if you look at Rap is just cuts behind Sanmi there as well, and that cut as well. So not only do they have the 45 cutting, they also had a shallow cut on the needle.
Coming. I didn't even really pay attention to that. Right.
So that shallow cut really, because if you look at Sanmi right now on that, he follows Rap's guy instead of following his own guy, and that got us into massive trouble and opened up a single gap. And Paul Kelly is now struggling to whether follow his cutter through or stay and help CJ. So they had 2 really good cuts early on that opened up the single gap to force us into being.
I would agree that a lot of it is new, and over the past year being, I mean, you're fairly locked down. You were mentioning yourselves over there, but like we haven't really had basketball over the past year, and a lot of this stuff has really caused me to think about the way that I practice certain coverages and all that, because I don't do much dynamic motion when I'm working on various things. I'll be like, hey, this is the way that I want it played, and I want them to see it and walk through it. But it's like in the game, it's not really going to happen that way if more coaches are implementing these kinds of cuts. Next one here is your first play, just attacking their 2-3. So you get penetration from the offensive right wing, you get a double reversal. There's some help side action, and the ball comes back to the left. You end up with about an 18-foot jumper from just outside. 18-foot jumper just outside of the left elbow. Sorry, my daughter wants a popsicle. I guess this supersedes everything. That's sort of what happens.
Oh, I got purple right there.
Yeah, you got purple. Awesome. All right. Sorry, guys. So I'll run it back and just kind of give me an idea of what you see, what you like about it, what the goal was in your opinion.
Yeah, so right now, actually, the first phase of that play was actually quite poor. We went into too much traffic. So one of our key things there is that we want to avoid being in traffic. Like when you're in a traffic jam, we don't want to go deeper into the traffic jam. Right. And that's a knowledge that we use quite a lot. And in that particular play, we went into it. So like David Hand's going in, defender's on his hip. There's a help defender on the block. There's a trailing defender coming just below the nail. So there's essentially nowhere to go. However, he did find the outlet on the weak side to Paul Kelly. From there, we actually execute relatively well, finishing with a pass fake and getting into the short jumper on that. But if you look at it's gone through CJ, it's reversing now against their zone, and that's something that we do quite a bit. So one of the things that the traditional high-low or the X play or whatever it is that we do, that's actually our Stanford play. So that's our 4-out play for us. But every time the ball goes through the pipe, which is rim to rim, every time the ball gets reversed through the pipe, we exchange the weak side to keep the weak side of that top 2-3 engaged. So that way then the single guy is being attacked. So right now you can see, because Paul Kelly exchanged, their guard here stays with Paul Kelly after CJ goes through. CJ goes through, and now we have a 2v1 against the wing. So Dave Lehan, he'll pass fake to the corner where CJ is. Defender anticipates, opens up the gap, and we end up missing the 15-foot jumper. But the one thing we always do is try and exchange with the weak side after the ball gets reversed, and we just feel that occupies the weak side second guard all the time. And throughout our preparation, we did a really good job of that as well.
That's awesome. I like the automatic. I also like calling it the pipe as well. It's funny because like Brian Shea comes to mind immediately. He calls the rim line mama. So defensively, like he's got all his players like, I got to protect mama, I got to get to mama, all that kind of stuff. And it's whatever works, right? What about the shot for you guys? I mean, there's a lot of debate, discussion around the mid-range jump shot and whether it's a good shot or whether it's a good shot circumstantially or like how do you feel about this particular shot and are you happy?
For us, for me, I'm still a believer in the mid-range jumper. I mean, I think I think it was Larry Bird said, throughout the game you want to look for the three, but if the game's in the line, you want to hit the mid-ranger. And
right.
For me, in this particular time, for us, we don't have the athletic ability, we don't have the interior presence traditionally to be able to have an interior game or to make athletic plays at the rim. So for me, the mid-range is huge for us. If we start making the mid-range, that's going to make them come to us, which then opens up the weak side kicks or reverse it through the pipe or make them scramble. So there's positives in still making the mid-range jumper. It's not for, I don't abandon it. We practice a ton, one dribble pull-ups off of a pass fake. We practice getting into the dome touches, kick off the dome. So we are massive on the mid-range game and getting there for it to be a threat, that they have to come to us opening up something else on the weak side.
Like it. There's a couple things that went in the chat, which is why I stopped to share. The first was Chris, who's here in Canada, was just saying we've got lots of exposure to new concepts, but really haven't had time for implementation. 100%, I would agree with that. And Mike's first question was, do I have enough to share? Yeah, we got lots of stuff from this game. The second question was, do you work on getting to the second level and engaging their second defender, resulting in either scoring or passing skills, which I'm assuming is relating to the first clip, but I don't entirely understand the question. Mike, if you want to unmute and
yeah, it's just relating to that first clip about working, because you said once he passed his first guy and he had a guy on his hip, he didn't have many options, but at certain levels we work on getting to that second level, engaging that second defender, getting used to scoring if he doesn't engage, getting used to passing, whether baseline or to the 45 slot, and just wondering if you work on those skills or if you talk about those things and how that relates to either scoring or passing, because you saw in this clip even as well.
Yeah, so I mean, like one of the things that we work a ton on is what we call pro stops, which is most people call the stride stop, or going off of the inside foot and landing and having the pivot foot on the outside foot. I actually think Dave Lehan actually made the wrong pass. I think he had to pitch the corner for an open three, because the original help defender actually came in and left, I believe it was James Kelleher on the ball side corner. But James probably wouldn't traditionally be a three-point shooter, even though he had made a couple in prior games. But one of the things that we preach an awful lot, and I think this is where Dave essentially made the decision to make the pass. Don't leave your feet to make a blind pass. You can leave your feet to make a pass with vision. So Paul or Dave obviously saw Paul Kelly, so that allowed him to leave the feet and jump over defenders prior to that. So
I'm sorry, Paul. I'm trying to scrub this while you're talking. I'm sorry for interrupting. You're talking about this pass right here,
Exactly.
right? When he penetrated in what you called the traffic jam, and then he passes ultimately to the 45, and you're saying it probably should have gone to the corner there.
Yeah, like James Kelleher was on the ball side corner. He would have had an open three, which would have been an acceptable shot for us.
Right.
That like our shot selection is, it must be in rhythm, it must be on balance, and it must be uncontested, and it must be within your range. Yeah. As long as all those are in situ, it doesn't matter whether we shoot in the first 2, 6, 8, 12 seconds. We're okay with that shot because that's what defines a good shot for us. So obviously Dave here, he goes off of 1 foot, but he has the vision of Paul Kelly, so we don't mind making a pass in the air, provide you a vision to see the receiver. And obviously Dave had that, and I like the way he cut out to the ball side corner as well after that pass, and that allowed us then to get into our flow, which allowed us to get into our Stanford zone offense.
Just to add there, Paul, we if as Menely plays the clip, if you pause it when he's just outside the right block, we call it gnashing it, or Steve Nash would always dribble baseline and wait to make that pass. Either if you pause right back 2 seconds, Menelik, he has the short side corner open for a three if he didn't turn away, and then he has the strong side or weak side corner, like you said. But we talk about the angle of attack. If he's going to score, this angle is fine. But to pass, he's cut off his own pass angle, and that's why we encourage our players to nash it or go baseline under that defender, and then you get a better angle for the pass. So there's one of the levels we talk about. That's why I want to ask how you talked about it.
Yeah, and I think, Dave is actually quite good at doing that. I think that defender actually closed off the angle to go underneath on the baseline. He was actually quite square on the chest, and I think the trailing defender actually closed them off on that. But for us, and that's why we teach the pro stop, because if that's not there, I would have actually rather Dave actually get into the pro stop, and that would have given him a chance to pivot back out, because even CJ on the trail right there was pretty much open as well. If he had pro stopped, given it to James, kick back out for CJ, and we'd been able to get into it a different way. This right here, I think, can be quite dangerous, but he did follow the protocol in terms of having vision of seeing a player in the air, and we're okay with that, as long as it gets there. But it is something that we do need for players to understand, is that we're seeing it more and more with the hook pass. We're seeing it more and more leaving the air to make those passes. So like our guideline on that was, if you have vision, you can leave the floor. If you don't have vision, then don't leave the floor for a blind pass.
So the one that I've heard often as a guideline is like, you can jump to make a pass, but don't jump to make a decision. Like, just, like, you know what you're doing before if you got to jump to get it there, sure, that makes sense. But if you're jumping like, all right, let me figure it out while I'm up there, you've probably made a bad decision at that.
Definitely.
I have a question about your stride stop. Wow. Stride stop, your pro stop, as you're calling it. Do you teach it against any height of defender, or do you have certain criteria, like if this player is like or smaller, you should probably engage them and go up? If this player is significantly like, I've heard that sort of as a teaching point for it before, and I'm just curious what you guys do.
So we teach it more based on where the defender is on the hip and what you see in front of you. So it's like, if the defender is on the hip, whatever that last inside step is, can you use that to explode ahead of the defender to get him on the back, where you can actually finish on the strong side or even the weak side? And we call the weak side a pro stop Lonzo. Or if they're behind us, it's a speed finish. So we identify between speed finishes and pro stops. Okay. Pro stop is just contact in the hip. Speed finish is if the defender is behind, and a speed finish can be across the rim and finish obviously with various finishes around the rim. So we do identify a certain amount of things. We also identify, we want everything to be really achieved within 2, if not 3 dribbles. So we're not like dribbling on the spot going nowhere and stuff like that. So our first dribble, you need to be willing to it. You need to be attacking. You can't put the ball on the floor unless you're attacking. Second dribble is to create separation. And that may be a step back. It may be, gnashing it back out, as Michael said. It may be various different things, but you must create separation with your second dribble. And then your third dribble, if you need it, must take it to score. So if your third dribble is not taking you to score, you must release it to get a pass. So it's just kind of guidelines to give players. It's not a definite, but it's guidelines, and more often than not, we follow it, and we're quite good at it in that respect.
What I like about what you just said, and what I also find very interesting about what you just said, is like, Paul, I'd lump you into about the same age category as me. And when I played, way back when, everything was definites or absolutes, right? Like coaches a lot of the time kind of took the power out of players' hands to be creative. They were like, you only do this in this scenario. Like you could only go inside foot layup. You couldn't have all these various finishes with various hands off of the different foot. And like, we weren't practicing these things. And now like I watch a lot of stuff and I'm like, man, I used to do that. And I used to get like absolutely torn apart by coaches for doing that stuff. And like, look how effective it's become with practice and development and talent and all that kind of stuff. Like, I'm not the biggest guy in the world, but I was creative with some finishes back in the day. And I watch certain guys now and I'm like, man, game's changed for sure.
Well, I mean, my first senior job, I was 29 years old to get my first senior job. And midway through the season, one of our point guards was, quite dynamic, pretty good at push passing off of either hand, off the bounce.
Right.
And had a turnover late in one of our games that I wouldn't say nearly cost us. It put us in this tough situation. We ended up winning the game, but I was actually nearly fired after the game and told that if we don't sort of going back to every pass being on two hands, I could be in trouble for my job. And now everything is highlighted and encouraged about all of that. So it takes me back, and that was only 10, 11 years ago. So so I think we have evolved in terms of.
Like Canada basketball now won't even teach a chest pass. They're like, there's no pass that comes from the center cylinder of your body. Like it's just, unless you're in transition looking, across court, like, free throw line to free throw line, there's really no use for that pass ever. So with our youth, at the provincial level and all that, we're teaching everything is outside of the body, hook passes, even around the backs are before the standard, what we used to teach all the time. So let's get into the next clip. Sorry, we spent some time on that one. This is defending. This is one of their horn sets. You guys are in a drop coverage. I was wondering about the tag in this, if you were a tagging team or what had happened. So I'll play it once going through so you can remember the clip a little bit, and then I'll try and talk through it a bit. So you guys are defending them. They run a horns action towards the right slot. There's a pretty deep drop. Your guy's back on the elbow. The ball defender kind of gets caught on the screen a little bit. They dive the ball side, and then they hit him through the pocket. The other horn lifts in behind, and when he lifts in behind, it basically creates a single side tag for the roller, which kind of pulls the man in who doesn't really tag. And I believe they called a travel on that one, actually. Yeah.
But so the things that we found in the scout was that they didn't really. One of the reasons why we were quite confident with the drop going into this game was their point guards didn't shoot if they got an advantage like they did right now. So they're in a 2v1 situation right now. Mm-hmm. They did not look to shoot against the drop. So we were quite confident, and that's why we were probably deeper in this game than we had in previous games, because of the fact that we did see that they weren't looking to shoot that. But what they did do, and we didn't, it was one of those things to be aware of, is actually that the weak side horn guy setting the screen. That was actually his go-to spot in terms of shooting threes. So that's why James stayed home on that one, and we were willing to go on the with Paul Kelleher. But Paul, that was half in and half out, and I think sometimes when you're kind of 50-50 on that, you're going to get punished. We didn't get punished on this, but we got away with it on the travel. I actually don't think it was a travel, but it's.
I'm immediately thinking of LeBron's one dribble from half court the other night, and I'm like, there's no way this gets called travel at a pro level type deal. But the comment that I was making in the one chat that I was in with people who were sharing that is, at our level, this gets called the travel every time. Like, I think that's a gather one too, but.
Well, it's not going to get called a travel now because of the zero step. I mean, I don't think the zero step was in 2019, but even then, I think you're right. It is a gather. I don't think it's a travel. I think we got away with one on that one.
What's interesting to me is the gentleman that you mentioned, that's his spot and where he's going to in behind. I've never really pulled somebody so far in behind on a horn set. And it creates a nice, like you mentioned your last defender who sort of comes halfway and goes half-half, puts him in a difficult spot for sure. But like, what a great idea to pull them in so far in behind and lift that other defender out of there.
Yep. They were quite creative. I mean, even from the first plays you saw, they did a shallow and a 45 burn. So, I mean, this Ukraine team were quite creative, especially opening, and we weren't ready for it. So, I mean, they did a great job of pulling us in all directions. But as I said, like James is quite smart. He's one of our better defenders, and he played a year young also the year before in Kosovo. So he was very much aware of how we defended things better, you know. But he stayed home on that number one because against Denmark in their first game, he'd hit 3 threes from that spot. So that's one of the, and I think they did a good job of exposing us in that moment when James stayed home. And
So your lowest gentleman, I guess who would become your most important defender or whatever, who's way off of the corner. If they had kicked to the corner on this early, say somewhere about here, who's going for you? Is it like an X, or is it's a stunt and it's a 5 is going for you?
Yeah, so we switched that. That like we would appeal switched on that.
Interesting. That's just because he's facing in that direction and he can see that pass.
So our rule on this is the seer goes, and that's the phrase we use. Whoever sees it goes. So obviously Paul Kelly's in that position. His back is to the defender, and then obviously CJ sees. So on that kick, and actually he's slow even reacting to it. So he should have even been going there anyway, regardless of whether the ball was kicked there or not, because then Sammy ended up taking 55 and we might end up switching Rap onto 55 there as well. So we actually work on that quite a bit.
So that's an awesome rotation. I love it. So 5 is going. You're saying Sammy might go right here, which is this gentleman here.
Yeah.
And the switch that you discussed that might happen would be the 2 that are under the basket at that point. So this gentleman goes
on the right hand side. So yeah, so number 2, Matt Harper, would have come into 55. So Matt is a 2 guard, so that would have been a natural switch onto their point guard there as well.
Love it. One more defending clip. I've got my
on that previous clip there, Minley. So like we spoke earlier about the fact that we wanted to force them into the corners because we felt there was no footage in the previous 2 games where they had hurt any teams from the corner.
Right.
So that's why James staying high on that and Paul Kelly coming in. So that was what, obviously we want to give up something. That's what we were willing to give up.
Interesting. Yeah. So like it factors into your game plan at that point then. Like
exactly.
let's see a couple shots from there and let's see what happens.
Yeah.
Love it. What are my notes on this? Great defense in my opinion. Touch action stagger. Oh, I like this clip. They ran some good action here. So I'll go through it. It's a touch action towards the left slot. They stagger away. Off of the stagger, he doesn't get a shot. You're still there. Turns out becoming a top pick and roll towards the single side. You guys are in the drop. And as you mentioned, their guard doesn't want any part of shooting that mid-range jump shot. They reverse the ball and try to attack again. And your ball defender does a great job guarding his yard. And then they go top pick and roll towards the single side. So towards the left now. And then he just kind of gets stuck in the middle, makes a pretty good pass to the other corner, and you guys get a good multiple effort contest out of that gentleman. So there's a lot going on in this clip, obviously. Take me through, talk to me about everything that you see. And I think this is a great defensive play for you, and I'd be pretty happy with everything in this.
Well, I mean, if we go to the outcome, which is the missed shot, where's the missed shot coming from, which is the corner, which is part of our game plan. So we, you know, it got to where we were willing to give up, which is the big thing. When we come off the horns here, they go into a stagger, and Nate Moore is really chasing hard. Now he's a bit late, so one of the things that I thought we didn't do a great job of in this game was defending early against screens. And I felt that we kept chasing the whole game, even chasing over ball screens, chasing over staggers. Their first step was always better than our first step, which was actually quite frustrating. So it always meant that we were arriving late.
So what would be, I'm sorry to interrupt you, what would be a teaching point for you then to be able to remedy or practice against that? Like, you know, whether it's in game or long term, how would you ideally like to see that played?
I mean, I guess looking back now, I mean, obviously in that situation, I mean, we've got Sammy and Rap or two who are front line, giving up a back cut and that. So like we could essentially be saying, don't top lock, but be in a position where you're just off being top locked. So that way then at least you're early,
Right.
getting over that screen. And if you do get back cut, then Sammy at 6'8" is there to protect the cut and you can chase him that way. And I don't think we did it that enough. And even on the screen right here, we're chasing this. So we never like he's in a good stance. He's in position. He's reaching, and every reach I think gives an advantage. So like we're chasing again on this, so we're not getting over with our left foot to defend in two. But
Right.
when they kick it back here and CJ ends up guarding the ball, you look at it, and now all of a sudden he's defending in two. He didn't reach, and when we say defend in two, it means that by the second step we want to still be in front. So that's our cue is defend in two. And I think CJ does a great job. Now he does reach here, but he pretty much full control with chest to chest and defending in two, and they couldn't get by him on that.
Well, he also reaches on the second, right? When the person stops their motion, which in my opinion, I think is the ideal time to reach. Like, in this perfect world, we want our defenders to never reach, but the bottom line is they're going to. And I think the way to teach that is like when we get to this point, when that offensive player stops their motion, like anybody who listens to Basketball Immersion, he talks a lot about the 0 second development, and he talks a lot about not turning your back to the basket. Well, I mean, up here, there's certain teams that win a lot of national championships, and every time you start to spin or lose sight of the rim, they're reaching to the outside so that it's away from a foul, but you're still controlled in front of them. So, I mean, I think they did a great job. You call it defending in two. He's still there. He's still in front.
And like essentially that we call that, so like you've heard me say like keep the gate closed. We don't ever want to open the gate. So when you open the gate, your hips are open, and then
Right.
you're allowed into your dome, and that's where problems happen. So like we want to keep the gate closed, and in order to be able to do that, we want to be able to defend in two. And I know a lot of people talk about first step recovery, and we talk about that against closeouts. The first step is hugely important to be able to get back and defend in two.
Interesting. Let's talk about that a little bit afterwards, about the opening of the hips and all. I know we got into that a little bit last week, but that's an interesting discussion for me. And then, I mean, obviously you get the result that you want, and not being married to whether the ball's going in or not, but it's always nice when something from your game plan ends up being true. Like, hey, we want you to beat us from there, and then you can't. This one is a really simple clip. I think it's their sideline out of bounds. It's a pin down with a zip cut, and it turns into a top ball screen towards a single side that results in a left-handed layup. He ends up making this. He takes your drop on the whole way. Your drop does actually kind of open up, and I'm just wondering, teaching points. What do you think of it? How could you defend it better, ideally?
Well, like I think the big thing, they're actually side out of bounds or zipper. They caused Denmark massive problems in that, so we were very much aware of this. And again, you look at it, we're late getting over the screen. We get this, the deception from their guard to move our defender in and then have him chasing was a good step, but we bought it too easily. Again, they had no business or no desire to even shoot that. I mean, he had such an advantage off the ball screen. They had no desire to shoot that mid-range jumper. So I think Sammy could have done a much better job in anticipating that he wasn't going to shoot and keep that gate closed. And he opened it up. And anytime you open the gate up, you're just asking for trouble, I think.
I would agree. Going all the way back to the start. So with the pin down in the zip, do you teach? So you mentioned that you had a mild bit of deception that sort of caught your player off guard and got him going the other direction. Do you teach any like through or under, whatever you want to call it, coming on the weak side and cutting them off so that maybe you force them into a reject on this screen and send them back towards the double side? Is that ever something that's in your package of things to do to counter it?
What's that again, on the ball screen or in the initial?
So on the zipper, either having him come through or come entirely on the help side, and then meeting him up top so that he's able to now send him back to his right hand towards forcing him to reject, sending him back towards the double side.
Yeah, so like one of the things that was actually poorly done there was we always leave a gap. So obviously James is hugging his guy here. So we talk about like we never want hugging defenders,
Okay.
because then we're limiting the options. So even if, as CJ did get deceived, he should have been able to split their 13 and James Kelleher where there's a gap and meet him there. Obviously, as you said,
Right.
either unset or rejected and stuff like that. So when you get, like I heard a phrase yesterday, when you start in trouble, sorry, when you start poorly, it's going to end poorly. So we started poorly and it ended poorly. So I think that's one of the things that we need. The start of anything really sets the tempo, and you saw that a while ago in the previous clip where we started really well, and then we end up finishing well. We started poorly here, and it was always going to be a situation where on this, Matt Harper stays home, which is what we want to have happen, and we wanted Sanmi to keep the gate closed, and it didn't happen. So. Yeah, I mean, ideally, James Kelleher leaves that gap and we shoot the gap, and we're giving up the flare. Even if we gave up the flare to the corner, then we'd have been able to switch it on the ball side with Tiernan as well. So that would have helped. So we just, it's just an error. Happens in youth basketball.
Sure.
I think youth basketball is full of errors.
I think I have the other clip too, but there's also a half court set that they run where they push enter to the wing, and then they get the zipper cut into the top ball screen going in the opposite direction. So they use this combination of actions a lot, like you mentioned. Would you, like you had said that you knew that this was something to watch out for? Would you walk through this on court, or would this only be something that you would talk about?
So we get 40 minutes every morning for walkthroughs or shoots or whatever we need to get done. We would have went through that quite a bit. And we would have spoken about, not get being on the first step, be there early, because I mean they're 7 and 10. They finished the two top scorers. They both had 20 plus points in this game again. They were just so quick, and I'd have rather us beat them on the first step and get back cut rather than being deceived and then us chasing. And they just got us the whole game. They were really, really good, really, really quick. And I don't think we realized they were as quick until we actually were in the game, and I think it's hard to replicate that speed when you don't have that speed within your team as well,
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, players win games, right? Like we can give them as much information as possible, but you've got to have a winner and you've got to have a loser, and good players are going to find a way a lot of the time. So this one is, I said, good action to get to inside pick and roll. This was a set of yours that I really liked. So I'll play this once and then we can go back and just talk about it briefly. Basically, it's like you can see the call there to start, but there's a pass to the left wing and then comes off of like a staggered double, like coming down the lane line. And then those two split and we begin reversing the ball. And on the reverse, we cut the 45, we burn the 45. So middleman through type action. And now basically we are into a zoom action, pass and follow, empty side, pick and roll, whatever you want to call it, where you get the attack middle and the drop off pass for a beautiful finish. I think he actually gets the N1 on this, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So give me an idea of options, how you executed, what do you feel about it, and anything that maybe you want me to go through fine point wise.
Well, this is actually a primary scheme of ours, and we call it scissors. It was actually the first, up until this point, we'd actually tried to do what we did in the third quarter, which is get beyond their defense and get some easy looks. So this is actually the first time that we actually ran a scheme in the game, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, this was your second quarter with about 8 minutes left, so that makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So we actually ran this the entire second quarter, and we didn't run it for the rest of the game, which we should have, because we actually got control of the game back into it. But we felt they were getting to grips with it. So even if we had left it till the fourth quarter when it was that tight, maybe we'd have got more joy out of it. But this is something like where on that, so that's a Euro ball screen is what we call that. And we leave it to the players. I mean, if they're shooting well, then on that 45 cut in the Euro ball screen, then they can replace themselves back out for a throwback. But Matt Harper actually cut through. He wasn't shooting the ball pretty well in that game, so he decided to go out and give us the empty corner. So that's a decision that we allow the players to make depending on how they're feeling in the game. And we just got to trust them in their thought process of whether we want to get a roll and replace, or whether we allow them to get an empty post ball screen.
Yeah, he definitely wanted it on that cut, though. You see him
Yeah.
clapping.
Yeah, and I think it's rare that you get like Matt would be considered what we would call a out and out shooter, and it's rare that you get shooters who are great cutters as well. They're so focused on being great shooters.
Right.
I find that, but Matt's one of those guys that's pretty dynamic as a two. But I think what's important here is that Sammy gets the 3-point play because he uses the pro stop against contact, and that allows him to be balanced at the rim and allow him to get the shot off at strength to be able to finish that as well.
I'm just laughing at the comment in there. I've heard that idea a few times before about having coaches from both teams talk about it. I think that might get a little competitive if we did that, Chris, just as an FYI. So just for anybody listening, Chris was suggesting having a run it back where both coaches talk about both sides. And I'm like, yeah, it might not work out well. It might end up with a little yelling. So this is probably just another one that you would attribute to simple error, but this is a baseline out of bounds and just defending the back screen. So they just, they line up in, I don't even know how to describe this formation really. So, I mean, you've got a guy at the nail, you've got a guy at the right elbow, got a guy in the center of the paint, and you've got a guy at the 45 on the other side. And they just rip the back guy and he gets it into him and he gets a nice, easy finish. So, I mean, other than being an eye twitch moment, what are you doing, saying, making adjustments for? Did you have the ability to plan for?
That was right out of the timeout, so that kind of annoyed me. So like, I mean, we fell asleep right out of the timeout, so I'm not massively enamored by getting caught in that one. But yeah, I mean, it was just a simple mistake. They didn't run it the entire game after that. It's probably one of those schemes that, it's let's try it now. They've come back at us. Let's see if we can get a bit of separation. It's a one-time gig that you're going to get this.
Right.
But actually, if they go through fully on this Ukraine, they actually end up going into their zipper again. So when the guard comes off of that back screen and gets screened himself, he comes in. The inbounder actually ends up coming into a zipper. So the zipper was a major action for them, as a primary action for them throughout the event, for them.
Yeah, I like. So I mean, I think they were probably thinking they were going to get to their secondary action in this, right, with the screener action right here, and then getting into the zipper and top ball screen. I actually think Seven was a little bit surprised that he's not getting the ball at that point. So Seth, I like one of yours. I think there's a lot of cutting on this one. Just kind of give me sort of your automatic. So I'll play it through one time as what's going on. So there's an enter to the left slot, a ball reversal off of a pin down, another pin down with a pass to the wing. Then you punch the ball, and on the punch, now you get some exchange cuts happening. Some guys around the perimeter reorganizing themselves. He gets to the center and makes a pretty hard shot over his right shoulder. So give me an idea as to, I mean, really more than anything, I'm curious as to what your teaching points are on how you reorganize yourself after the post. But
yeah, so we had two different style of point guards in this team, and these were kind of go-to schemes for CJ. CJ's actually a year young in this. He's actually under 17, not under 18 in this on this team. But that was when he's running the point. That's actually his go-to scheme, and we call that splash. And the reason we call it splash is because it's actually a warrior scheme, and it's actually the two cuts on this is actually Steph and Clay. So obviously Splash Brothers, so we end up calling it splash.
Yeah,
that's the reason why we call it. So that would actually be Clay coming off that number 7, and that would be Steph coming off the second cut, which obviously is Draymond then on the post, or Bogut at the time. So we actually, looking back when they evaluated the program, we actually didn't run this half enough. We were actually very successful for the minimal amount of times that we actually ran this scheme. So I was actually frustrated with myself that we didn't run this more throughout the tournament. And against Slovak in the previous game, we actually ended up having a bunch of points off this. I think we had something like, we had 2 threes off it, and we had 2 post-ups with Sammy again. I think we got fouled on the other one. So our success rate off of this was actually quite good. But we ran Paul Kelly at the point more than we ran CJ. So we actually ran a 1-4 high scheme for Paul Moore, which was his go-to as the point. We actually didn't run high with CJ. We ran high with Paul, and we ran splash with CJ. but we didn't run CJ enough at the point either. So that's probably one of the reasons why we didn't run the scheme. But in terms of that, actually CJ, when he makes the post entry, this is actually one of our automatics, is actually what we call a Spurs cut. So he should actually finish that cut right to the charge circle. But he doesn't, because Sammy's making his move and Dave Dehan replaced him on the wing. But actually CJ traditionally would actually finish that cut right through and go to the opposite corner, but he replaced Dave at the pipe.
Sorry, what did you say you called that?
Spurs cut.
Spurs cut. Okay.
So essentially it's the cut that they ran for Duncan the whole time. They just cleared it out, that they ran over the elbow to clear him out, so he'd go to his mid-range game. So we just called it Spurs cut because of that.
Nice, like that. I've actually got a funny moment, completely unrelated. When I was on the women's side at York, I remember we were playing one team, I won't name names, but the coach was a new coach. He was a first-year coach. And I recognized in the scout immediately that they were running the entire playbook of the Golden State Warriors. So we had a pretty good edge in the game. And I remember after the game, he was shaking hands all the way through. And then we ended up like talking about it. And I was like, so running that Golden State Warriors playbook. And then every time he saw me, he'd always mention like, how did you know? How did you know? And I'm like, I had literally been reading it like the week before. So it's interesting that you stole one of their sets. There's some good movement in that for sure.
I think the weak side action on that is key as well. So when we go back on that, so like obviously when the weak side four are on the, as we start the horns set, we give it to the weak side. When he gives it back to the original pin down, so right here, James, CJ goes through, Sammy screens Tiernan. After that pass, James gets a weak side action. We are huge on weak side action, because if you look at number 4 right now, guarding James setting that pin down, they're more focused on that 2-man game right there, which gives us more space in the middle of the knee. So our weak side action is huge for us. It's huge for us to give us especially space, and if we go interior with some stuff.
And I mean, I sent you my playbook, and the first thing you said was, "Hey, man, it's good stuff. You need some weak side action." And I'm like, "Yeah, I do." You're right. So the next one I think is a fairly similar set, or fairly similar in terms of, I was looking for, again, what are the automatics? What are the cuts? You end up with a great backdoor out of this one. So if I remember correctly, we end up getting to the second side and a diagonal screen, and you get the backdoor cut here off of the fake. And then end up with the shot out of the corner. And I mean, you don't end up with the score that you want, but I'll go through this one more time and try my best to talk about it. So it's again like a horns type action. There's an enter to the right side. There is a cut away off of the flare. We reverse the ball. And then on that reverse, the horn that was on the right side is now coming to the offensive left block. We punch the ball to him, and we're basically spread at this point. Everybody is getting out to create some space, and you get an excellent back cut. I don't know how that happens sometimes. I'll be guiding the video, and then it'll go into something else, and I'm not like able to guide the video any longer. That's really weird. But you get a back cut along the baseline, and they pull in to help, and you get a wide open 3 from the corner on the other side. So give me a run through, please, and thank you.
So we actually started quite poorly. Sammy's actually way too wide on this. So the flare pass is actually a difficult pass in the end. But I think it's successful in terms of landing with Paul, because of the fact that the defender actually goes under James, which allows us to make that pass. But if you look at it, we actually clear it when we make that horns entry. We actually clear out that side. So if you look at Rap, he's going to the opposite side in a 4-4-2 action, which doesn't allow a switch to happen. So that way, then when CJ actually sets on that skip pass off the flare, now we get a 1-5 action, which again they can't switch, which then means that we're going to get some separation to the post. It's actually a poor post entry pass. So, and where Sammy is actually causes confusion, because he's actually in the mid post, which actually hurts some of our decision making. He's actually either going to be on the block, or he's got to be in the high post. He's actually in the post, which creates indecision. But Paul, one of our rules is, in order to know when to cut and when to stay home, is see a back of a head, see a shoulder. So if you look at the reason why Paul Kelly back cuts from the post entry, is because the defender shows the back of his head. So back of the head is an automatic signal for us to back cut. So if you look at it here,
Yeah, there he
just
is.
roll it back a second. They try and dig down, shows the back of the head. On the scramble, now Paul Kelly gets a back cut, and Sammy finds him in a decent back cut in that. And again, technically James Kelleher could have back cut in that, but Paul was already in the space, so he holds space for the open three.
So as you were describing, you may have noticed I went to a different part of the film, and I'm sorry for that. I was just trying to look at something. You mentioned the two that were not switchable. You said the first one was this flare because it was a 2-4?
No, the baseline. If you look at the baseline, that's a one.
This one I saw was unswitchable right here.
Yeah, so that's actually that's a 1-5 or 2-5. Sorry, that's a 2-5. And now the second screen is a 2-4.
Which was this one right here?
Yep, that's a 2-4.
Okay. Nice. Like that.
We actually call that Chicago. It's actually one of the ones Tom Thibodeau ran for Boozer when he was in Chicago.
Nice. So I'm assuming it's more important at the national team level to be able to realize things like this, but with the game trending towards positionless, these kinds of screens being unswitchable, do you think that they will continue to be unswitchable? And how important is the numbering system at the level, like the age group that you're coaching here, in your opinion?
If this was us guarding, if this was us guarding this, we'd have actually switched everything, because James Kelleher can actually defend anywhere from 1 to 4, actually 1 to 5. So on top of that, we've got Rap as well. So Rap can actually defend 2 to 4, 2 to 5. Sanmi is probably more of a 4 or 5 defender, and then obviously CJ can guard. So we've actually switched a lot of this action. So this scheme would have actually suited us defensively. Whereas Ukraine didn't switch as much, and they had, I suppose, a natural interior forward just like we did. So they were always going to stay home on that. But I do agree with you with the positionless happening. You are going to get your 6'6", 6'7" guarding your 6'2" now. I think it's becoming more and more prevalent.
Because they do switch this 2-4, right? Like at the top here.
Yeah, they do switch that one. But then they switch that. But then we've got a 6'8". And actually, James did a poor job in not taking advantage of the switch.
Yeah, like go to the front of the rim and get real big now. Like you're a big guy.
And Sanmi's actually a really good passer over the post, and he would have found James there as well. So, yeah, he didn't do it. He could have done a better job taking advantage of that advantage. Essentially, I actually started staying away from mismatch because I think it's, sizes is another advantage. So we're obviously using the word advantage now. So I'm trying to stay away with mismatch. We just have a size advantage rather than a mismatch.
Right. Not as much negative connotation in terms of when you're talking about it. It's like, hey, this guy is taller than you. I'm not saying that there's anything other than that going on. Right.
Yeah.
I think this is a defending clip, and it is the ball screen against the 2-3, just talking about the rotations that you guys make. So you're in a 2-3, and I think they screen the top of it, and then they end up punching the ball. You guys double down. They end up with an open shot up top.
Yeah, so that's probably a weakness of how we defended in a 2-3. So if you look at it, we tend to try and keep the ball on one side of the floor. And with that in mind, it nearly becomes a tandem. So with the way Paul Kelly had defended that, he was closing off the reversal, essentially icing the middle of the floor.
Right.
Which the way that they actually set the screen was actually very creative in terms of, because it was like a touch screen and roll, which really hurt us. So we're probably lucky to get away with the missed 3 on that. So if you look at it right now, Paul Kelly opens it back to the sideline. They touch screen and roll, which really puts us under pressure because now CJ has to come in, which gives the ball side kick out, an easy pass, and then just again 0.5 and they punched inside and we're scrambling. It was horrific, but they did a really good job of exposing us on the touchscreen and roll.
That touchscreen as an adjustment is not one I think I'm sharp enough as a coach to make yet. Like that's great in terms of changing the angle and then filling in behind. Like get out of there fast and noticing that they're gonna end up keeping it on that side of the floor, which will create an advantage on the reversal.
I think one of the things that is frustrating about that is that we wanted Sandme to be isolated in 1-on-1 in the post. So while we gave up the 3, or while they got the touch screen and roll, I was okay with that because that matchup with Sandme and their interior guy, we were okay with that being an isolation 1-on-1. So the frustrating thing is our guard digging down and leaving that pass back out for an uncontested 3. So leaving the isolation, I'd have been fine with. Yeah, that's fine. But giving up the kick out was probably the thing that probably frustrated me most in that particular play.
Are you fine with the double closeout? Would you have preferred an X, or do you want the guy who dug down, who wasn't supposed to have dug down, to?
Well, if you go back to what we spoke about earlier in terms of seeing, James did the right thing. It's actually our guard, because he made the initial mistake. He made the mistake initially. He's trying to make up for his mistake, not
Right.
realizing that James is the seer.
So James would be the bottom right player who's here in your 2-3, and then the person who dug down and is in the trap should be going out to the bottom right of the 2-3.
Exactly.
You covered something in your explanation right there that will take away from one of my other clips, a question that I had to ask. I'll mention it when we get there. This is one of their baseline out of bounds. I just thought it was an interesting action. They actually don't end up scoring out of it or getting anything out of it. Did you have it, and do you like the way that you defended it? So anybody who's listening, I mean, basically they cut their help side corner player all the way across, and then they bring their help side block player in like a curling action to the ball side block, and the guy who's on the ball side block just sort of pins in towards the rim, giving them like a little bit of space for a layup.
Like how we defended it? No, they got a shot off.
Fair.
No, but it was quite creative, and I mean, I actually don't even know what we were playing there. It looks like we were playing a zone. I can't even recall what we were supposed to be playing there, to be perfectly honest. It's one of those
feel like
things
you're in a
where,
2-3 and he's just way too low.
yeah, so I think we were actually switching it. It looks like we're supposed to switch it, and then we just got caught in the second switch. We turned them. They did to us what we try and do, which is see a back of a head you cut, and see, our guard turned the back of his head and he cut him and got an uncontested layup.
This is the clip. I'm just going to move forward one because I I don't think there's a whole lot there. It's just obviously a little bit of a slip up, but it's a unique action, and I'll do the shameless plug for my hoop blobs there. You'll probably see that one go in, hoop blobs, just as a unique action, even though they don't end up making the layup. So, I mean, if you're listening, please give it a follow. And obviously it helps if you subscribe to the YouTube and all that fun stuff as well too, please. This one is defending. And then my question was, are you guys running a 2-3 with a tangent? Which you basically answered a couple clips ago. But when I played, we actually used to run a 2-3 with a tangent. And I haven't seen too many teams do this before, where like it almost looks like an eye down the center. And then the way that we ran it, I don't know if you're doing the same thing, but we used to run it that the person who was lower, similar to like a 3-on-2 continuous drill, the person who was lower would take the first pass. So this is some interesting action by them, but I was more curious about your 2-3 than anything.
Yeah, it's like technically Paul should have been a bit higher on that to drive him into the nail, but because he got turned, it actually put CJ under pressure, and CJ, was ready to take the weak side. He makes a quick follow, which puts him out of sync for the reversal to where the ball actually goes in the end. So
Right.
If you see it right now, James is under pressure on the weak side because of Paul getting turned a little bit there. So that kind of hurt us there, yeah.
Yeah. And then you guys end up with the swing back and you get the shot out of it. But I mean, the top part of it with the tangent, do you do a first pass type thing? Or, I mean, like, how does the rotation out of that alignment work on the initial?
Well, actually, what should have happened is actually Rap should have come up to the wing on this here, and CJ could have stayed where he was supposed to stay. So on the back side, if Paul does get turned, the wing comes up. But if it's the ball side, then CJ goes out to the wing. So we actually just kind of, again, it's amazing how, like, just making a foot to 2 feet wrong adjustment can actually affect the entire thing.
For sure. It is. I mean, we discuss a lot of the time, like, hey, your problem is actually all the way back here. All this other stuff is trying to play catch up, right? So like to the saying that you said earlier about like, if you start wrong, you're probably going to finish wrong type deal. It's, what do we got? Pin down, zip, top ball screen. So this is the same action we were talking about before. Obviously, obviously it's a staple of theirs. It's same idea. So there's a pin down and a zipper cut, and then there's a top ball screen attacking towards his left hand. You guys are in the drop. He gets into your big guy's body and finishes with left.
And the thing about it too, again, like is if our forward is over on the elbow, he's not getting that. It's like it's fine margins. Like our forward is like a half a foot to a foot away from being able to defend this really well. Again, with Rap on the weak side, taking the roller and then giving up the corner on the weak side, which is what we want to do. Dave is actually stepping in a bit here, and he's actually giving up the corner on the ball side. So we're giving up what we want to give up, but on the turn, we're just in the drop. We're a half a foot in the wrong position, which then puts us under pressure and opens the gate, and then we end up giving up an easy 2.
I'll tell you a very interesting story afterwards if you have a moment or two and you can stick around, just about a discussion I had last night. I see a comment in the chat. Give me a second here.
Yeah.
Do you want to step up in a stunt? I'm assuming he means off of the single side there.
Yeah, both single side, yeah.
And
come on, give me something good that we actually did here, Manly, because you've killed me here in the last like 6 or 7.
I'm so sorry. There's a few good ones.
We did only lose by 11, and it was a 4-point game with 4 minutes to go. So we actually did do some good stuff here.
So this one I thought you played pretty well. Here's a good one for you. I was just wondering what you guys thought, if it's in your scout, etc. But I mean, basically, it's a chin action to a Spain pick and roll. And they end up fumbling the pass, but I think that you guys are there and well balanced in terms of what you need to be doing and helped where you're supposed to help.
We actually do okay in the initial element of it, but if you look at the back before the pass, we're actually late to the help. So right here, let me see if I can get the annotate in here. So if you roll it on again.
Oh, move, come on. On the chin part here.
So keep going until they turn the ball screen and get to the block. So the back screen here on the Spain, we get over it. We're chasing down, stop right there. So actually right here, if you look at it, draw here. So right here, we should have actually been further out. So we call that heels. So we always want to get to a situation where the defender's heels right here are outside the lane. Okay. And that's what we're looking for. So he's like, even at that, our defender right here is still 2 feet off wrong. So because he doesn't get there, Rap doesn't get, and we call that the hoop position. So when we're helping on the weak side, we want to get to the hoop position, which means that we're always going to try and get inside the defender. We got lucky with this because it was a bad pass. We didn't get lucky because it was good defense. We got lucky because it was a bad pass. And he actually passes downwards to his hips. So our first defender is 2-3 feet away from being heels outside the lane. And then our weak side help defender, giving up what we were supposed to give up, is 2 or 3 feet away from being in the hoop position. So we actually get lucky in this, to be honest.
So then this brings me, there's one more Spain clip here, but the question that I would have is there like a standard way that you want to play Spain type screen and rolls? So this is a great back cut by you guys again. So let's go through this clip first, and then I'll get back to that question. I apologize. So just a beautiful basket there by you guys. So for anybody listening, ball starts on the right slot and gets reversed, almost like a dribble drive type action where he attacks and gets to a strong hand coming down the lane line. And then there's a cut from the opposite short corner in behind the defense. Great drop off, great finish with the reverse.
If you go back there again, and we go back to one of our principles again, which guides us, Dave comes off the road runner on this. So when CJ gets into the handoff here, so right now it's a road runner. So he wasn't even thinking. He was just taking a handoff and he was going.
Yep.
Sammy sets the screen here, which allows us to get into the lane. Now, when you look at this defender right here, just go back a half a second, right there. So right now, if you look at it, Sammy sees the back of the head. That's an automatic back cut for us. That's our signal right there. So when Dave turns that corner here, watch his head. It's still the back of the head. So that's the reason why Rap ends up coming what we call a bit of a blurkle. So block to block, we call it blurkle. So he gets to here, and it's just an easy dump off for Dave.
I'm sorry. What does blurkle mean?
A block to block circle. So we just call it.
Block to block circle. That's great. I'm so stealing that, Paul. I love that.
Everything we try and do, we try and make it a single word. So our cues are single words, not sentences or phrases. We try and make it so like when we're in the heat of the moment, blurkle, roadrunner. So it's all boom, boom, boom. It's kind of quick hit words.
Right. Blurkle. That is awesome. If I learned one thing today, it's that guy. All right, I'm going to clear the annotations for a second. And then I think this is the side Spain pick and roll. So they get a wing entry to the right side. They call from the opposite block for the screen. And then the guy who gave the wing entry goes and sets the Spain pick and roll. So again, is there a way that you typically want to play the Spain pick and roll? Like, are you switching all three? Are you like, how do you want to play it ideally?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a massive thing in youth basketball back then. I mean, this is probably one of the first times we've kind of seen that again. I mean, so we traditionally would be a switching team, so we'd switch everything so that way then, we would do that. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, Sammy isn't he's actually way more athletic, but as I said, he was coming off an 11-week injury. He had only 10 days to prepare for this. So he was still finding trust within his ankles to be able to move laterally going into that event. So sometimes he got it right and sometimes he didn't.
Mike the Cracker had a question that I think I missed. It was probably a clip before. What was the plan with 14? Mike, could you explain?
It was on the zone. It was on the zone offense. He was like, I'm not at the right spot. I'm not at the right spot. At your road runner. He was like the passenger on the road runner.
Sometimes you just get lucky, Mike.
Yeah, because here you have the handoff. I would say pick and roll, but he's there. I'm putting my hands out, and now I don't know what to do. I'm just standing here.
But that's our Butler scheme. So like we made an adjustment just in the last game of our prep. We would have normally any exchange. So Sammy would have normally, if I go back here to the annotation, sorry.
No, it's okay. Let's get
so
right.
When that happens, so I think what kind of happened there, Mike, was, so if we go back there, Menelik, when the ball goes on the wing, so when the ball's central in our Butler scheme, you stay here. So when CJ went into a dribble out here with Dave, I think, Sammy would have, it's caught, we call this no man's land. So between the pipe and between the wing, right now, no man's land. So we want to get in and out. I think you're right. Sammy's like, oh crap, what's happening here? Am I to dive or am I to stay or whatever it is? The ball came back central and then he stayed. What would normally happen is if the ball is with CJ here, Sammy would dive and then Rap would actually replace back up here. What would normally happen. So I think Sammy was confused, but in the end, he actually made the right decision, because when the ball is central, or forward actually stays on the nail.
Mm-hmm.
So
and it allowed for that pass. Right?
You don't want him to screen up on that dribble drive.
I think the rule
if it's not your concept, then it would be player intuition.
You got lucky. There's no doubt about it. I mean, sometimes just things happen that fall into place. I mean.
So you don't want a Nurgle nail to block.
Mike's messing with you a little bit, Paul.
That's what he always does. He always does that in messaging with me. So that's not me.
I would worry sometimes on that screen up. While I think that it's sometimes a logical one, I would worry about picking up the moving screen on that. Geez, Mike, I found a clip where they did something great, gave them some dues, and then you go back and try and tear it apart. Make me look bad here. I think we only have about 2 or 3 more clips. I'm lying to you. It says, yeah, there's about 40 seconds left. So this was one more great defensive play. It was on their baseline out of bounds. You actually get 2 blocks out of it. And when the title moves, you'll see this was the point of the game that we were talking about where you're 61-57 out of it. So, I mean, they get it in, they attack the paint, they reverse it back. He tries to pull through and he gets swatted, and then they try to just get a quick one up, and your big man swats him again, or maybe he loses the ball. I'm not really quite sure what happens on that one. But I just thought it was a great play and was, asking, does it fit within your concepts? Do you feel that you defended it well, not just based on the outcome?
Yeah, well, there's 3 concepts in there, and if you look at it initially, when you get on the inbounds here, so on the catch here, yep, keep going. So now we are on the ball. So Paul is here. We defended him 2, so he doesn't get to go baseline, which means that Mar Harper doesn't have to go heels outside the lane. So Paul defends in 2. The ball gets reversed. They go into a ball screen now. So we've defended in 2. That's the first concept. Now Dave chases over. He's chasing a little bit, but it's better than what it has been in the previous ball screen. So he's there now. Look at the difference on Sanmi being in the right position on the mid drop now. So they don't open his gate now, which means that we're not getting penetrated. He holds the gates closed. Yes, he's backing off. But again, it's because we knew that they weren't going to shoot this shot. And they didn't the entire game. So he keeps the gate closed. That puts him under pressure, rolling on. Gates closed. They're looking for a kick out. You go.
And multiple effort play on that closeout, right? Like he takes that roller all the way down on the help side and then recovers on this closeout. They can't get anything out of it.
So now, first step recovery on the ball. We defend in 2 again. All right, so keep it going. Now we get beat here, but stop. We're in a situation where we're close to being heels outside the lane. So now we're in a decent enough margin for error. So now when he gets through, that allows wrapping in the hoop position. And we're giving up the corner again, which is one of our potential giveaways. Off you go. And then we're able to get there in terms of him trying to Euro step and we get the block.
What are your principles on a couple things in this clip? The first one I want to ask about is this hostage dribble right here. Let me just clear your annotation for a second. Sorry. Do you teach anything special on the recovery for a hostage dribble? So on this ball screen, number 10, his first move is to get back into the body of your number 10 and sort of keep him on his back. Do you at all teach anything like coming on the other side of the body, or are there any techniques to get back without getting that contact? And then
I think it's very hard. I think it's tough. I mean, especially with the way that we defend. I mean, we rarely, if ever, go under ball screens. I mean, if you go under, it's because you just haven't done it right. So I think that's one of the disadvantages, potentially, especially with the hostage dribble. Now we call it a snake dribble, but with that, you are susceptible chasing over that if you don't defend the first of being caught in that. And obviously, it's going to be a defensive foul on Dave on that. Right. Part of me thinking now, knowing what we know now, do you next it? Do you appeal switch it? If that happens. So now there's various things that you can do off of that as well. So that was the first time really in the game that we actually defended the point of contact on the ball screen relatively well, where they had to use that throughout the game. They particularly didn't have to do that to shake off Dave. So it would have been the first time that we came across that. If he had gotten called for a foul, would we have made an adjustment? Who knows? But from watching the game leading into this, I think that was the first time that they tried to get us on that. So we weren't prepared for that.
And then my only other question on it was, do you have a philosophy at all about like the principal defender not ever blocking shots and going vertical, and the help defender always being the one looking to block shots?
No, I mean we never really get that much into depth. But the one thing that we do want to have happen is meeting heels outside the lane where now there has to be an
Right.
adjustment by the offensive player. What happens after that, we won't, that's a defensive situation we need to read, but we don't really. The one thing that we do in terms of blocks is we don't want to block from the hand. That's one of our major key things on that, is we want to block on the release, after the release, not necessarily from the hand. I just don't trust referees that they're going to make that call the right
Right.
way. We don't want to block with the ball in the hand.
I don't know if I think it might be 2 more clips. I think this one we've basically covered. This is a defending a top pick and roll towards us. Is it towards the single side? No, it actually looks like there's a horn screen that happens here. I'm sorry. It's a horn screen again, and then not covering the elbow the way that you were talking about in your drop before.
And in that situation, you look at it, I mean, our defender goes under the ball screen. I'm not massively enamored by that. So I would have much rathered the defender go over, and that would have forced, Rap to be a bit wider, I think. But I think by going under, Rap thinks he's recovering, so therefore he's in a bad position. Look at his back foot now, and he gets his gate opened, and then we're in trouble. I mean, you've identified in the league that we were awful at keeping our gate closed in this game. I mean, that's one thing I've taken out of this.
For sure. And then I think this is the very last one. This was the one clip of the 1-3-1. And I mean, you talked a little bit about in the preparation of the game and not liking, liking the fact that the ball goes to the corner, but not liking the overall set. It kind of took the air out of the sails a little bit. But what sort of made you decide to go to the 1-3-1 at this exact moment?
So we had actually, coming out of a timeout, we had scored in us the previous possession. I think if I recall right, we actually had an offensive possession before we went back into the 1-3-1, and there was 3:30, 3:50 or 40 left in the game. We were 9 down. They had really hurt us, as you saw prior to that, in terms of having our ball screen coverages. We felt that we needed to try something that they hadn't seen us do all game, to kind of maybe get a deflection, to make them, get a tough contested shot, that we could get a run out and get back into within 7 or 6, make it hopefully a 2 possession game, if not just a short 3 possession game. But that was probably, we hadn't run a 1-3-1 the entire game. It was in our arsenal in the prep. It was in our arsenal. We utilized it in the first 2 games. So it was something that we had done. And I just felt it was the right time to maybe, just because they had gotten on I think prior to that, I think the score prior to that was actually an inbounds where they hit another long corner 3, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
So we just wanted to try and see could we make something different. But again, they're number 10, and he hurt us the whole game in that. He just made that skip pass, and we try and make some decisions as a coach, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But I think the one thing that I learned, and I was taught this when I was younger, is don't not make a decision. Make a decision to go with something, or make a decision to not go with it. But don't ever let yourself in limbo, because now you're kind of saying, well, should I or shouldn't I have, or whatever it is. I made a decision to go with the 1-3-1. Would I change it differently? I think I'd still go with the 1-3-1, but I would have probably put our back guy at the top, which is a guy that we would normally have there anyway, and put Rap at the back, and put Dave, and then put CJ on the ball side wing and stuff like that. So I'd have probably changed 1 or 2 positions, but I wouldn't change making that decision maybe.
So my last question, and thank you for your time. Obviously, there was a lot of film, and I've gone over the time that I've asked you for as well, because apparently that's what I do. But my last question is, do you think that there was anything that could have gone into the preparation that you missed, or that you put in incorrectly, that could have helped with the outcome more? I mean, obviously at this level, you're dealing with excellent players on the other team. And as an outsider looking in, I think you did an excellent job, as I mentioned to you previously, in terms of the gentlemen that you're working with, their skill level, and where they're playing. I think they're playing above their level. And that's not to say that they're bad by any means. They're good players. I think they're listening to your changes and adapting quickly and all that. So is there anything that maybe in the preparation you might have missed, et cetera, going from there?
I've always been a tempo coach, and we knew that this game was important, obviously, to get a stranglehold over them in the pool, and and potentially do something that we've never done before, which is make a top 8. And I think I think as a coach, I probably put the plans in action to be a little bit too cautious. So I think I would have probably made us a bit more, go back to being aggressive the way that we know that we traditionally are. I'd have probably pressed a bit more to slow them down. Looking back now, I'd have probably switched a bit more. I think we were a bit too honest, but more defensive stuff. I just don't think this team would have trapped well. I think I would have loved to, because their guards weren't taller than our guards; they were just quicker. So would I have been brave enough to go into the trapping situation with more lack of mobile forwards? Might be something I might look at. But offensively, probably staying with our scissor scheme would have been something that, But I think when you're dealing with underage players, they really believe in what you're trying to do and when you're doing it. So when you have to make adjustments on the fly or go away from the plan, I think what we as coaches now need to do a better job of, especially at the youth level, is allow the players to understand multiple plans. And I probably didn't do that as a coach with this team, is
Right.
allow them to understand multiple plans. And this team was smart enough. They were a very, very smart team. We weren't a very athletic team. We were able to get up and down and we were able to play at tempo, but we weren't a very athletic team. And I probably didn't allow them the opportunity to know multiple things and probably made it a bit too narrow for them. So if we had a few more weapons in the arsenal, I think that it would have helped us, especially in that situation.
I mean, we're always juggling time and preparation as coaches, right? So I understand that, and in an ideal world, that's what it is. But as I said, I think you guys did a great job in this game, and we sometimes come up short in outcomes or whatever. But in terms of adjustments, there were a lot. This is not. I've watched games before where I'm like, what's this coach doing right now? What's going on? That was definitely not the case here. It was like, yeah, all right, I see that. I see where we're going. So I wanted to take a second. As always, I close most of the shows the same and just really say thank you, Paul, for your time. I really appreciate this. Obviously, I've been in several calls with you over the past year, and been privy to you sharing notes and having some great conversations of late. And I really respect and admire that you would take the time to sit down with me, share the game, allow all of us to get better. I think it's awesome, and just a really sincere thank you for the time.
No, thanks for having me. I think it's always enjoyable for us to look back on, especially when there's a couple of years of a gap. And when you learn some things that you would look and you're looking back and you're going, why didn't I know that then? Why didn't I have the knowledge of that back then? So so that, I think they're always good things. But so thanks for having me. It was great to run it back.
Appreciate it. Thank you. And then just another big thank you to all the coaches who jump on and listen every week. I really, really sincerely thank you for that. And anybody who's listening, people who subscribe, who retweet, all that kind of stuff, it means a lot to me because, as I've said in previous shows, we're pretty locked down here in Canada, and we're not the best climate for sharing, for information, and for discussions about getting better, especially if you're a coach of my level. Like, I'm a college level coach, but I'm not at the top like a national team coach or something like that. So to be able to sit around with such advanced knowledge with so many people, I really, really sincerely thank you for that. Please tune in next week, and I'll see you guys when we run it back next week. Thank you.